In the first episode of our chair build, we took a little field trip to Advantage Trim and Lumber to choose our materials, designed the chair and worked out all the details using scale models, and then made all of the parts ready to assemble. Now this episode is pretty much a straight up chair build, so the usual safety aspects apply. Eye protection and hearing protection should always be used in the shop. You know how I feel about that. But we're also going to be working with this Komaru, or as it's sometimes called, Brazilian teak. It's not actually teak, but it is a tropical hardwood grown in Brazil. And anytime you're working with an unfamiliar wood, especially when it's not a domestic species, a respirator is probably not a bad idea. Good dust collection at the table saw, because we are going to be doing a lot of ripping, and a respirator will remove pretty much any chance of you having a bad reaction, certainly at least in your lungs, and it's just a good idea to do when you're working with unfamiliar woods. Remember, you are your own best protection in the shop. Your best safety device is up here. In this episode, we're going to put the parts together into a couple of sub-assemblies, put all of these together and make sure everything folds and works the way we want, and then apply finish. But while I was working all of this, I got an interesting call from Advantage Trim and Lumber. So we're going to start this episode like the last one with a field trip. So I'm back at Advantage Trim and Lumber with David James this time, and we're going to talk about teak. Now remember, in the last episode, since I started the project, we did it out of Komaru because teak was really not dreadfully available, and there weren't really good options for a sustainable version of teak to have. But thanks to Advantage, now there is. So tell me a little bit about this teak, David. It's plantation grown, right?
That's correct, yes. We've selected the best plantations throughout the world to purchase our plantation teak.
Excellent. So you have it in decking sizes. You also have it in standard lumber?
We carry a 3/4 inch decking material in both 4, 5, and 6 inch. We have a 21 mil product, which is a little bit thicker, in the same widths. We also stock rough teak in our locations, which it would be in the 4/4, 6/4, or 8/4 size material. We also manufacture and stock deck tiles, teak deck tiles.
Okay, like your other deck tiles that you sell.
That's correct, yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
So whether somebody's doing a decking project or building furniture like we've been doing at Wood Academy, they're going to be able to find what they want in plantation-grown sustainable teak through Advantage.
That's correct. The majority of teak in the world today is plantation grown. Our buying staff selects the best mills and best producers and best plantations that are available in order to have the best quality product come into our locations.
We're now ready to start putting together the sub-assemblies for our chairs. So we're just going to use some common acetone, a clean rag, and wipe all of these surfaces with the acetone and then allow them to dry for, I don't know, half an hour, 45 minutes before we actually get into the assembly. We're going to start by dry fitting these pieces together. And that's because where the rabbet in the slats meets the groove in the rails, the rail groove is not symmetrical top to bottom, so we want to make sure that this is the top part and our sides are not reversible. They've got the notch cut in them, so we want to make sure that everything's put together the proper way. Now, these are not being glued into place for now. They're just being set in. We'll be able to move them side to side and insert these spacers that are going to lock them in place. But for now, we don't need to do that. We just need to get these parts glued together. Now that we've got these in place, we can just bring these together, sealing up all the gaps. Not worried about it being square yet. We'll get that when we get these other pieces on. So now, we'll dry fit this. That works. We'll dry fit this one. All right, so everything works. This is going to set up the way we want it to. Now we can mix up the required epoxy and apply it to the joints. Be sure to get good coverage down inside the mortises and covering the entire tenon, the shoulders, all the faces, and the end. The sides get firmly clamped in place on the assembled stretchers. Check the assembly for square. If needed, a clamp can be added on the diagonal to hold all the parts in alignment while the epoxy cures. I'm a big believer in learning from other people's mistakes, and that's why I share mine with you here on Woodcademy. This is the footrest part of the chair, and this is the actual seat part. And you may remember that we trimmed the ends of both of these to 14 degrees so that they would align together without a big gap in between. But what I didn't do was cut the rail part here at 14 degrees along one edge, which I should have done before I assembled everything. Make sure you do that. Pick the right edge, mark it if you have to, and then you're just going to shave it at 14 degrees. It's going to be a lot easier to do this on the table saw before you assemble. We did not glue the slats in the seat sub-assemblies. We'll secure them in place by gluing spacers in the groove between the slats. Rip some stock so it fits snug within the groove. The parts need to be crosscut to fit. And for working with small parts like this, I've always found a hand miter box to be just about ideal. Start by cutting and setting the outer spacers on each side. And test the fit. This outer gap needs to be wide enough so that all the parts can move freely when folding and unfolding the chair. With this fit verified, a little epoxy can be added to the spacer and it can be set in place. Always cut these spacers in pairs. You'll need one at each end of the slat. Finally, tap the spacers home until they're flush with the edge of the rail. The spacers between the slats should all be the same size. It's a good idea to cut them and dry fit them all first to ensure that the slats are evenly spaced. And remember that all of the spacers need to be matched at the top and bottom of each slat. The two armrests need to be completed before we can begin assembly. The center point of the pivot block needs to be measured and marked to be 17 inches from the pivot hole on the back of the arm. It can then be epoxied into place and secured with screws. It should be positioned on the inside edge of the arm, just beyond the rounded over edge. The hardware we installed in part 1 of this project is now used to put all the sub-assemblies together. The first step is to insert the 1/2-inch nylon bushings into the through holes that were drilled for them. The 1.5-inch panhead brass screw is fitted with a brass washer, then passed through the nylon bushing and threaded into the brass insert. For simplicity's sake, I'm assembling one side of the chair first. Putting all these pieces together is the first opportunity you'll have to test the system. Once you prove everything folds properly, we can move on with the assembly. The front stretcher of the footrest needs to be notched so that the legs can extend to their proper position with the chair open. Cut the shoulder of the notch to approximately 20 degrees using a handsaw. The waste is then removed with a sharp chisel. Check the fit carefully as you work, removing just a little material each time until you get the fit where you want it. The footrest attaches to the chair with a pair of surface-mounted brass hinges. It's easiest to set the chair upside down and block up both sides to approximate the angle. Then the hinges can be drilled and screwed in place. Now we've got the chairs assembled for the first time. They fit together properly and they fold properly. I couldn't be happier. Now there are a couple of small details that need to be taken care of before we take them all apart again and get them finished. One is there's a stretcher that's supposed to go between these two front legs underneath the seat. And it gets beveled across the top so that it becomes a stop tight up underneath here to keep the chair from folding too far backwards. It's one of two. I don't know if you can see it on the video here, but my two legs are not quite going as horizontal as I want them, which means I need to remove a little bit more of the notch on the base stretcher here that we had removed earlier. I need to clean those up a little bit more, get a little more material out of the way so that these fold out, and I'll check this chair the same way. That's the reason for doing this kind of a dry fit setup. Make sure everything's working before we apply finish, before we go through all that, and then ruin it because we have to go back and fix mistakes. So let's get on to that. These stretchers are being attached with brass screws, so they'll definitely need pilot holes. Solid brass screws won't rust, but they're not as strong as steel. So I run a steel screw of the same size into the hole. It sort of pre-threads things and makes it a lot easier to get the brass secure without breaking it. The stretcher on the front legs needs to be beveled to match the underside of the seat, so the angle is measured and the stretcher beveled to match. And this stretcher is attached the same way as previously. Drill the pilot hole with countersink, use the steel screw first to create the threads, and then attach it using the brass screws. It's going to take some time, but all of the faces need to be sanded, including in between all of the various slats and openings. From the beginning, I knew I wanted an oil finish on these chairs. They're going to be outdoors, and no matter what finish you use, it's going to need to be replenished regularly. Refinishing oil just means cleaning the chair, a light sanding, and applying a new coat. It's simple, fast, and easy. The Teak oil finish you see me using here is not that. It creates a hard barrier, which has to be scraped and sanded off in between finishes. So be sure to use a true oil finish. Surprisingly, mineral oil is inexpensive, easy to get, and works very, very well for this type of application. As you assemble your chairs for the final time, be sure to add Loctite to all the screws. The chair folds, and without the Loctite, the screws could work loose. And to prevent wear, don't forget to add a washer between any of the wooden parts that move against each other. These chairs fold up pretty easily. They are a bit heavy in the Komaru. Using Teak would certainly make them lighter. But either way, they'll be a proud addition to your outdoor spaces for many years to come.